Hey everybody, it's Lo and welcome back to my channel, Lo Without Limits. In this video, I'm going to talk about microplastics, estrogenics, and our exposure. So if you want to see that, then just keep watching. I've done videos on these topics before that I will have linked down below, and I also feel like I should have made this video to post in April because Earth Month, but some new information just surrounding microplastics has come out. I've also been reading Estrogeneration, which is a book that I've had on my list for quite some time now. I'm about halfway through it, so I've just been learning so much from this as well. I figured I would just share some new information that I've discovered, as well as some tips on how to not let it impact our health and well-being, with the added bonus of doing better for the planet too. So as I'm sure many of you know, and if you don't, then you will now, microplastics are pieces of plastic that have just broken down into microscopic particles that have ended up in our food, our water, our air, and now in our bodies. And these occur because as things break down due to the elements and times, and they just become smaller and smaller pieces, a lot of natural things disintegrate over time, biodegrade. Plastics don't do that. They just become smaller and smaller little bits of plastic that are not doing any good for the planet when they're being produced, and are doing much worse as they break down into these microscopic bits. They are also extremely toxic, as many have BPA and other toxic endocrine disrupting chemicals, which is how it ties into the estrogenic part of this video. And not just to our planet, but to us, to plants, to animals, really everything is affected. They're also made up of different chemicals and polymers that made them into the bigger plastic that they once were. And not only are these bad on their own, but they also have the tendency to bind with other pollutants that are in our environment, most often polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs. And another thing I'm sure many of you know, but if you didn't, then now you will, but these microplastics have already been found in the human body, and we consume 5 grams or a credit card's worth of plastic every single week through what we eat and what we drink. And previously it has been shown that microplastics were already found in the womb with developing babies, so they were already being exposed to these microplastics before even being born. But most recently, studies have shown that microplastics are in our blood and have been found deep inside the lungs of living human adults. And what's honestly one of the more crazy parts to me about the plastics that were found deep inside these people's lungs is that not even all of them were truly microplastics to where they're naked to the human eye. Some of them are about the size of a sesame seed. So if you've ever had a nice little sesame seed bun and you see those little seeds, they're completely visible to the human eye. That's not super small when it comes to like something that's micro. So for those to be deep in our lungs, to have made it all the way in there, is pretty crazy. And with hearing that, you're probably wondering, well, how'd they get there? How did a sesame seed of plastic end up in our lungs? Not even in our digestion, like oops, we accidentally ate a little piece of plastic, but like in our lungs, that was breathed in. Well, the 2 most prevalent types of plastic that were found in the lungs were polypropylene, which is used in plastic packaging, and PET, which is used in disposable plastic water bottles, or any bottle really. And these 2 types of plastic, and just even those 2 products alone, plastic packaging and plastic bottles, are some of the most common plastics and common things that we come in contact with every single day. And since they're touching our food and our beverages, that also means that they can easily transfer on to whatever we eat or drink, which contributes to that credit card's worth of plastic that we consume through our diet. But it's not just what we're eating and what we're drinking that's contributing to the microplastics in our bodies. Other sources include sewage byproducts, synthetic materials from clothing, and just other fabrics that you come in contact with, as well as plastic beads in our skincare and just different skincare things that we're putting onto our bodies, as well as the stuff that comes off of tires, those little tiny particles that come off the tires from your car. So really, it's coming from everywhere, and it's ending up in a lot of stuff. And when all of these microplastics end up in our water, such as the ocean, then they can also easily get evaporated into the air, which is another reason why it gets into the air that we're breathing into our lungs. So either through water vapor because of all the microplastics in water, or just through dust, especially when things are touched and rubbed. Little pieces and little particles do come off, and when you're home, often that accumulates into dust, and that's just in the air that we breathe every single day. Additionally, a study late last year found that people breathe up to 7,000 microplastic particles every single day from clothes, toys, furnishings, which adds up to another credit card's worth of plastic that we're inhaling every single week. So between what we're eating, drinking, and breathing, that is 2 credit cards worth of plastic every single week making its way into our bodies. And these credit cards do not have a great interest rate. They have very bad cashback incentives. We don't want these credit cards. And it's actually through our lungs that these microplastics make their way into our bloodstream. So deep in our lungs, once it goes down all those little ventricles, there's a thin cell layer where oxygen goes from our lungs into our bloodstream to go to the different parts of our body that needs it. And then old blood comes back up with the CO2, finds that, and that's how we breathe out carbon dioxide. So it's through this little cell wall deep in our lungs where all of these transactions happen, and it's through the cell wall that some of the tiniest microplastics make their way through and get into our bloodstream. And these microplastics that were found in our bloodstream are mainly from synthetic fibers, from just different textiles and things that we use in our daily lives. And then once in our blood, similar to how plastics act in the environment and never fully break down, they don't really fully break down in our bodies either. And our bodies also don't know what to do with it. It's not something that like our DNA is like, oh, once you sense that, let's attack it the same way we do a bad bacteria or a virus. Instead, it just kind of floats around there in our blood and can lead to plaque buildup and coronary artery disease and even heart disease and heart attacks. And again, these microplastics have an estrogenic effect once in our bodies where they just continue to accumulate. Now, I have an entire video on the health effects of too much estrogen in our bodies for both males and females caused by the increased exposure of estrogenic chemicals. But as a quick overview, these estrogenics come into our bodies and bind to our estrogen receptors, which both males and females have, and just wreak havoc and really throw off our bodies. It affects our development, especially for younger children. For males, one of these side effects is moobs, which does have a clinical term that I forgot. It also affects our reproduction and our brain function. And I do want to note that microplastics aren't the only source of estrogenics that we come in contact with in our modern lives. There are so many different things that cause it, especially stuff like skincare and just different personal care products. One of the things I learned recently that is actually an estrogenic as well as lavender, especially if you are burning it, because it's the scent compounds that give lavender its lavender smell that actually have an estrogenic effect, and it's super minimal in comparison to other estrogenic things. But when you do breathe it in, such as the lavender incense, and you breathe in that lavender chemical compound, that scent, as a smoke, it actually does have a pretty big estrogenic effect onto our bodies. So I guess we just can't have nice things anymore. But that is just if you're burning a lot of lavender incense a lot of the time, that maybe you should be a little bit worried about that. A lot of the estrogenic effects that are impacting our health do come from man-made chemicals, especially those found in plastic. Now, what are some ways that we can reduce our exposure to these estrogenics and microplastics? I've spoken about many ways on how to do so before, but just to recap, since it is such important information that we can all incorporate into our daily lives, again, to improve our health, our well-being, and fun bonus, to help the planet too. Well, the first one is the most obvious, and that's just avoidance. And while it is the most obvious and it's the easiest to say, I'm not gonna lie, it is the hardest to actually implement into our daily modern lives. If you look around, a lot of things are made of plastic. You go to the grocery store, which is what we're all doing to get our food. It's very rare that we can actually just, go and get a fresh piece of meat from the butcher. It's never touched plastic in its life. Also, this meat is fully grass-fed and doesn't have any microplastics in it. Probably very, very hard to find, since microplastics are even found in the air and in the ice in the polar ice caps. So it's definitely hard to avoid completely, but just trying to avoid plastics in general. Single-use plastics, plastic water bottles, anything where plastic is really touching your food, such such as just plastic wrapping, switching over to reusable items made of glass and metal, things that won't leach out. And if you are going to come in contact with plastic for your food, just make sure that's really minimal. Again, BPA and BPS free. Don't heat it up at all. Just avoid plastic water bottles, especially leaving them in your car. Just trying your best to avoid plastic where possible, especially when it does come to what's coming in contact with your food, since that will go directly into our bodies. And if you do need some single-use items, just opting for biodegradable or compostable items, something made of bamboo, coconut, wood, paper, things that can actually be easily disposed of and fully break down, unlike plastic. The next thing to avoid is clothing or materials that are made out of plastic-based synthetic fibers, such as nylon or polyester. So thankfully it is becoming a lot easier to do, with different brands and companies focusing on bamboo, hemp, linen, cotton, things that are much better for the environment, for our bodies, and just don't release microplastics. And so it is much easier than it was years ago. And I also have an entire video that I'll link down below, just kind of focusing on sustainability and fashion and clothing in general. But if you do have something that is made of these synthetic materials, just taking good care of them to where they don't release and shed these microplastic fibers in the wash. I've mentioned it plenty of times before, but getting something like a guppy friend where you put all of these synthetic materials in there, because even if something is made out of recycled polyester or recycled nylon, personally a lot of my activewear that I love is made from recycled water bottles, which is great because it is getting these water bottles out from the landfill, actually recycling them, putting them to new use, giving them new life, making sure they're just not ending up in the ocean or breaking off into different microplastics. But just because it is recycled and it is better for the environment in that sense, it still will shed microplastic fibers. So just putting it in something like a guppy friend to making sure that all of that is caught and properly disposed of, instead of ending up in our washing system, into our water, and then off into the environment where it can just end up on food as it's being sprayed on crops or something like that. And if you do have the ability to just add on a microplastic filter to the back of your washing machine, it's much easier to do that and then just to clean it off every once in a while versus having to always put something into a guppy friend. So if you do have the ability to do that, that is something that's super easy to do and to incorporate into reducing microplastics and to reducing the production of microplastics. And that goes into the next tip, which is to recycle properly. So obviously avoid plastics and single-use plastics as much as possible. A lot of them are also too thin to where they can't even get recycled. Like plastic wrap, you can't really put in the recycling because it will actually just get caught in the recycling machines, make it shut down, ruin the whole recycling process, then nothing can get recycled. Or if you put your recycling in a plastic bag, just like a plastic trash bag, it might not get recycled because they don't want to open it up because they don't know what's inside. So if you can't see what's inside, they're not inclined to opening it up to getting all of your plastic water bottles recycled. So just recycling properly, since right now currently only about 8% of what's put into the recycling bin does actually get recycled. A lot of it gets tossed aside and often just ends up in the landfill. So obviously avoiding, making sure you're just not using all of these plastics in the first place, but if you are, to recycle properly, that way they can be given a new life and can be put into something else instead of just becoming microplastics or ending up in the landfill or in our oceans. And my last tip for avoiding microplastics in our bodies is to focus on your air quality. So surprisingly, a lot of people always think like, oh, inside my house is so clean, the air is great, outside is smoggy, I'm not going to open the window. But there have actually been studies showing that the air quality inside of our homes is often much worse than outside. So crack open a window, get the fresh air in, let some air circulate about. And this is often because, again, dust accumulates as things are being rubbed. This is linen. Little fibers are coming off. Although I can't see them, it will accumulate to dust. It will end up in the air and I will breathe it in. And a lot of things also have formaldehyde. One thing that I don't love about my apartment is that we have vinyl flooring, which is plastic. So as things are being rubbed, yes, plastic little bits are coming off, getting off into the air, accumulating in the home. I could be breathing them in. Obviously, trying to avoid plastic-based materials in your home, looking for things that don't include formaldehyde and plastics and vinyls and things like that if you do have that option to do so. But also just opening up your windows and making sure that all of these chemicals and fumes that are coming off and off-gassing from all of your different products are just filtering out. And another way to do so, if you have the funds to do so, is to just get a really high quality air purifier. We have 2 in our apartment, and that will just make sure that all of these chemicals, fumes, volatile organic compounds, and really small particle matters, PM 2.5 and PM 5, which are just really, really tiny particles, including microplastics in the air, get caught and just sucked up into that filter instead of lingering out in our air and then into our lungs. And another way to avoid overall estrogenics and not just microplastics is to really look at what you're using in your home and on your body. A lot of personal care products have different chemicals and fragrances that do have estrogenic effects. A lot of things, if it's not really saying where the fragrance is coming from, could just be a plethora of chemicals that don't need to be shared with the consumer. So definitely watching out for that, watching out for what you are cleaning your home with, trying to find cleaner cleaning products. I personally love Branch Basics, as well as looking at what you're putting on your body and on your skin, finding clean makeup, clean sunscreen, things without benzenes and sulfates and all of that stuff that just gets into your skin. Our skin is our biggest organ and it just gets directly absorbed into our skin, into our bloodstream. So really watching out for what you are using daily. That way you don't continue to impact your body with all these increased estrogenic chemicals. So I know this video has a ton of information and can be a lot to take in terms of our modern lives and different ways that we can just be better about reducing our estrogenic and microplastic exposure. But there's clearly some topics that I'm super passionate about, I'm continuing to learn about, and I just wanted to share the more information that I've been learning. That way you are inspired to make some changes or even just share this information with others. So if you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, comment down below what change you'll make and what else you want to see here on my channel. And while you're there, be sure to subscribe. I upload a new video every Wednesday. So until the next one, thanks for watching.